We just explained in chapter 53 the uniqueness of the First Bais Hamikdosh, that the Shechina's presence in the First Bais Hamikdosh was unnatural. What does it mean, unnatural? Usually, Hashem, when He set up the world, as a process, how His light, His energy, His power, His vitality comes into this world. That there's a process that goes from Malchus da Atzilus into Kodesh HaKadoshim of Bria, which is the Chachma of Bria, Seichel of Bria, Bina. Then it comes down through all the process and goes to Malchus de Bria and comes into Chachma, the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Holy of Holies of Yetzirah. And it goes through the process. From the Bais Hamikdosh, it skipped process in the First Bais Hamikdosh, and it went straight from the Malchus de Bria, and there was no more process. It just jumped all the way, which means the concealment and the diminishing of this revelation, this light, was no longer happening. And what came into the physical world in the Holy of Holies, in the First Bais Hamikdosh, was unnatural and it was foreign to the world. What does it mean, foreign? It didn't conform. It superseded, it overruled every rule of nature, of time and space. We saw it in the Luchais, how they had from all six sides, you can read the Luchais. We saw it in the space where the Aron didn't take up any space. Yeah, it took up space. The rules were all canceled. In other words, the level of light in that room was incredible. This tells us that not only was a level of light in that room, in the Holy of Holies, extraordinary, since the Kodesh HaKadoshim is a source of light to the world, it's a source of vitality, it's a source of everything into the world. That means everything at the time of the First Bais Hamikdosh was unnatural in its great revelation of godliness. To take a moment, we can explain something unusual. We're all familiar that the First Bais Hamikdosh, while the Jewish people were successful in doing all the sins, many, many different sins, from adultery to idol worship to murder to different things that took place, hatred, but those were all more normal, limited amounts. The thing that happened in an incredible way was idol worship. Idol worship in the First Bais Hamikdosh is unimaginable. What does that mean? The greatest scholars, the greatest holy, or maybe holy is not the right word, the greatest spiritual giants of that time, Yeravam ben Avat, one of the original instigators of idol worship to try and get all the Jewish people to worship idols, was a brilliant Torah scholar. He was a spiritual man. You have kings that lived in the first temple, Menashe, unbelievable tzaddik and everything, except he was the worst wicked man in idol worship. He was such a great person. What was going on there? What was this idea of running after stones and planets and celestial beings and rocks and trees and serving them and worshiping them? So something to consider, which we'll see as it passes through into the next generations, into the Second Temple and in today's time. In every generation, there's a certain level of spiritual awareness. Maybe I'll say spiritual wokeness, just to be cool. A spiritual awareness, spiritual reality that goes on. And that spiritual reality elicits a counter reality coming from klipa, coming from concealment. Whenever you have somebody that has a tremendous level of holiness in any particular area, klipa tries to counteract that. What does that mean? In the First Bais Hamikdosh, the people had a tremendous awareness of God, a tremendous sense of godliness, of spirituality. This was a result of Hashem's presence in the Bais Hamikdosh so strong that every person in the world, what was their interest? It was godliness, it was spirituality, it was understanding creation. And because of this, they didn't have that, meaning, just to give it an understanding, is Menashe. There's a story in the Talmud that Menashe once came to, I forget which, Rabbi Chia or Bar Chana, I forgot who he came to, and Menashe was one of the great kings who unfortunately became infamous for his tremendous idol worship. I'm not sure if it was him or one of his predecessors who wrote on the entranceway to the Bais Hamikdosh, "There is no God to the Jewish people." It was incredible, the level of idol worship. I'm not sure if it was him or one of his predecessors, I forget. But in any case, They were discussing in the Talmud, how could it be that these people worship idols? I mean, come on. Well, and he comes to him in a dream. Some say he came to him actually right there. And he said, if you lived in my time, you would have picked up the hem of your robe, not to get in the way of your running and run ahead of me to worship idols. What happened? There was a tremendous desire and awareness of spirituality that the forces of Klippa, the forces of negativity, created a counterbalance of tremendous desire to find other avenues to serve God. What actually happened, the Anshe Knesset Hagdela, who were the men of the Great Assembly, they were the men who put together today the Amidah that we have, many of the blessings that we have today, they set up. They came, and there's a story told in Gemara, I think it's Yom, I forget where it is, where they prayed to Hashem, and they davened, they fasted for 3 days, they asked, please remove the desire, the temptation of idol worship. We can't take it. It was after the first temple, we can't take it, it's too strong. It says the pull to idol worship is much stronger. Think about today, any of the temptations that they use on billboards or magazines or places to tempt people for lust. The level of attraction to idol worship was many, many more times this, because the rabbis also try and take away the temptation of immorality, of adultery. And all they succeeded was to minimizing it. They couldn't get rid of it. So imagine today we have a minimized appreciation of immorality, attraction, or lust for sexual matters. It's minimized compared to what it was. And yet that's the greatest temptation in the world today and all over the world. This is nothing compared to the temptation that took place then in the times of the Bais Hamikdosh for idol worship. So the rabbis prayed and they took it away, but Hashem said, if you take that away, I'm taking away the prophets too. Because everything has to be a counterbalance. If I take away, meaning when God gives a challenge to somebody, he also gives you strength. It's a very beautiful encounter. There was this person who was wanting to marry a non-Jewish girl, and they sent this person to meet with rabbis and guidance people and mashpiyim, not a Chabad guy. And someone said, and he wouldn't change his mind. He is marrying this girl because he's in love. Logic can't take the place of love. And someone suggested, go to the Rebbe. He gives out dollars every Sunday. Go. Why should I go? Anyway, he ended up going. Told the Rebbe that he was told to come meet the Rebbe because of and he told him what's going on in his life. The Rebbe told him, I'm envious of you. He was like, whoa. The Rebbe said, if you have such a challenge in your life, that means Hashem gave you resources too. If you could tap into those resources Hashem gave you, like the famous thing, we don't give, when you come back from Sam's Club or Costco, you don't give the 4-year-old to carry the potatoes. You give it to the kid who's strong. He's a big 18-year-old. A 4-year-old, you give him the roll of paper towels. Here, carry this into the house. Why? You don't give a weak person to carry heavy loads. If Hashem gave someone a burden in life, the Rebbe once told this to the injured of the Israeli soldiers, that they were called the nechei, the wounded. The Rebbe said, you're not the nechei, you're not the wounded. You're the mitzuyanim, you're the excellent. I'm not patronizing you, said the Rebbe, but if God gave you such challenges to miss an arm, miss a leg, miss an eye, it means you have the ability to overcome it. You're strong. Hashem doesn't give heavy burdens to weak people. In other words, when Hashem is giving us challenges, he's giving us tools for it. But if Hashem said, I'm taking away the challenge of idol worship, I'm taking away also the challenge of prophets. But if you want to be a little more technical, it wasn't really just to counterbalance it. It was that Hashem minimized the spiritual awareness in the world. So together with the spiritual attraction, nowadays, who is deep enough and profound enough, it says for a prophet to come to a level of spirituality, and to be into a space of prophecy, tremendous work on developing self. So in those days, a person had a choice. The avenue to get to spirituality through impurity, boom, you're there. Easy. Come to a rock, a stone, a tree. It was easy to do it. To come in holiness is very difficult. So the avenue most people took was to find spirituality through unholiness. And by the way, in those days, you think they spoke to a rock. The same power that someone feels today in the most spiritual time of Rosh Hashanah and Kippur, they felt much more than that talking to the rock, because they were in tune to the power of creation within that rock, the power of Malchus, the Bria of that rock. They were in tune to it. So they didn't just talk to a rock and it was a bloom. There was a spiritual program going on. There was an interaction. There was powerful energies that were being exchanged in the moment of idol worship. It wasn't like they spoke to a stone or they prayed to the stars and they just did a meaningless act. It was powerfully inspirational. We can't understand what that means because God took it away. Think about the most powerful experience you have watching a child the first time he's talking, watching something that really will move you in life. 10 times that, 20 times that, 100 times that was the experience of idol worship. So in the first temple, where did all this come from? And this is why you had prophecy in the first temple. It says the amount of prophets in the first Bais Hamikdosh was double the amount of people that left Egypt. When the Jews left Egypt, was 600,000. That means 1.2 million prophets existed in the first Bais Hamikdosh. Now we only record the ones that told prophecies that were important to us. Where what's recorded in the Torah are things that are important to us. The other 1.9, et cetera, prophets, we don't know about because it wasn't important. But prophecy was so common and prevalent because the level of spirituality, spiritual awareness, was unimaginable. That's the first Bais Hamikdosh. Why was that? Because in the first Bais Hamikdosh, the light that came into the Holy of Holies physically came directly from Malchus or Bria. That means a light in the Holy of Holies, or in all of the world, all the Jewish people, was a tremendous level of godliness, and therefore that was something that today we can't relate to. The attraction, the enjoyment, the geschmack. It says as the generations went on, what's called enjoyment went down. The next Bais Hamikdosh, we know the biggest attraction, temptation, aside from the great value of hating each other and killing each other and murdering each other, the amount of killing, they say if the Jews survive the second temple, will survive anything. The amount of Jews that killed each other in brutality is unbelievable. But you find something fascinating. In the first Bais Hamikdosh, life didn't have so much value, not because it was meaningless, like you find sometimes in some societies where life is meaningless. There was such a much greater thing, spirituality. Losing your life didn't matter so much. Even the second Bais Hamikdosh, losing your life was something you find it wasn't such a big deal. Every single year there was a new Kohen Gadol. He died because he wasn't holy enough. He didn't deserve to be the Kohen Gadol really, but he died. And next year another guy took him over who died, and they knew they were going to die. But they went in, even though it was corrupt. They had bought their way in. They got connections, protectia to become the Kohen Gadol. No one survived the year, but they did it. Everyone spoke. Look at this. Even the times of the most, let's call it sinful or inappropriate behavior, what was the value that a Jew held valuable was going to the Holy of Holies, and if I could buy that, and even though I'm going to die, it was worth it. But the bottom line is, in the second temple, what was really the attraction was wisdom. You had, after Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, then the Greek philosophers and all the vision and the whole challenge of the second temple was really development of mind, all the way to the Romans. The Romans took it down another level, got all about the body. They got much more into the worshiping the body. Everybody came at the end of the Greek Empire, starting to the Romans. But the first temple was all about spirituality. The second one was all about the attraction of the world with wisdom, philosophical ideas, what a mind can understand. And then it went from there down and down till, became out the body and became selfish, all about the narcissistic behavior, taking care of self. But the point we want to make here is that the first Bais Hamikdosh, the effect of such a great level of spirituality, of Malchus or Bria coming down into the Holy of Holies, affected that everyone in that world, in that time, lived on a different level of experience. That's what we're up to in Tanya here. Now we're going to the second Bais Hamikdosh. It's Ayin Daled, page 2, or 148, 3 lines down. Now the second Bais Hamikdosh had a very interesting, something that was sort of, got the word for it, I don't want to say catch-22, but a contradiction in terms. On one hand, it was lower, on one hand it was greater. We know the second Bais Hamikdosh missed 5 special things. It didn't have the Aron, the Urim V'Tumim did not speak spirituality, didn't have the Man, it didn't have, there were many things that were missing from the second Bais Hamikdosh. The menorah that was there was not the, they had a menorah, not right away. They first had one type, and then they, at the end they had a real good menorah. But for a while they had different menorahs because they didn't always have a gold menorah. Sometimes there was a time, I think it was made out of pipes, maybe even wood. There was different stages. Like after the Maccabees, after the war with Maccabees, it was made of, I think, tin. And they welded together a bunch of pieces. And then eventually they got enough money to get, once again, a proper menorah. But the menorah was there. They did have a menorah in the second Bais Hamikdosh. The things that were missing were all related to the Holy of Holies, what was missing there. Because end of the first temple already, they buried the ark. The Mun was buried. The staff of Aaron was buried. The Shechina was not the same Shechina as we'll see in a moment. So a lot of changes took place. But so the second temple, on the other hand, it was much greater. It says, Gadol yeh kved habayis hazeh. It says the second temple was greater. it stood for longer. The first temple stood for 410 years. The second temple stood for 420 years. So it was longer. And we know when you ever have something physically, it says Rebbe would give respect to wealthy people. Because if Hashem gave them wealth, that means some spiritual greatness there too. You have to always know everything in the physical world is a reflection of how it is spiritually. If something's bigger, stronger, more special, more meaningful, more powerful, more emotional in the physical material world, then it's a reflection of something spiritual. It could be good in the spiritual sense or good in the impure spiritual sense. But it's always something more. So the second Bais Hamikdosh, it says it was taller. It was they built the building a little taller, and it was made last longer. So how could you have both? How could it be that it was less and it was more? The answer is that is the answer. What does that mean? Because it was less, it was more. I'll explain it. How could it be less and more? What's the ultimate purpose of this Bais Hamikdosh? Sometimes, by the way, less is more. You want to tell someone a message. If you say it in 2 minutes, they get the message. It takes you 45 minutes, you lost them. But we're saying something deeper here. Less is more means that if you want what's the purpose of creation? To make a dwelling place for Hashem in this physical world. The higher something is, the more it's unrelatable to the receiver. And therefore, if I want to change something, if I want to, for an example, explain something to somebody else, that someone who does not know anything about science should appreciate something cool, I shouldn't use any Latin words. I shouldn't speak in any words that are more than 9 syllables. And I should try and explain it with things that are in layman's terms. And then the person will walk away saying, wow, that's really cool. But if I speak, not that I could anyway, but if I was a scientist who could speak with full scientific and complex terms, the person I'm speaking to will walk away unimpressed. Not because what I said wasn't good. It was above his head or her head. Therefore, the more something comes down, the more it could do its mission of impacting the world. The first Bais Hamikdosh, because it stood in a higher place, really couldn't transform the lower parts of the world and make the true dwelling place for Hashem. But the second Bais Hamikdosh that came, as we'll see in a minute, the lower manifestation of godliness, and therefore it was missing some of the very nice whistles and bells of the ultimate Bais Hamikdosh. That was the first one. The third one will have both qualities, because that's where the world will be transformed. But the second Bais Hamikdosh was missing some special whistles and bells. But because of that, was able to relate to the simplest things and interact with the simplest and engage the simplest, because it wasn't aloof. It's layman's terms. One of the things about teaching Chassidus in English and learning is not just because it's more practical, people understand it. That level, the Rebbe wanted, the Rebbe spoke many times, how to find new avenues to explain and teach Chassidus in different languages, different formats. I remember once the Rebbe spoke about they put the Tanya out in Braille. That even in the world of Braille, we have what my father has. I remember getting one of the copies. It's the Tanya. It's thicker, but it's a thicker paper. It's all bumps, but it's amazing. They print it in Braille. Imagine that level of expansion of Haflatza, of spreading out the light into the world. So in the second Bais Hamikdosh, the fact that it was lower really made it greater, because as we spoke in the very beginning of Tanya, if you remember, there are two things in the world. There's greater and there's better. Better meaning more appreciated. Angels are greater than any man will ever be. But appreciated, God appreciates human beings, because this is where the story is told. This is where the action takes place. This is where it's at. So will never be as great as an angel, because angels are perfect. They are really perfect. They're designed, pre-programmed, they can't mess up. But people who are imperfect, that's where the real enjoyment is. And no different, a famous example given in Chassidus is why sometimes a person can make a dinner in the kitchen, and the dinner is delicious chicken or whatever food someone likes. But you know what the best thing is? To go into the kitchen and to go into the pan and scrape off some of the crunchy stuff that's stuck at the bottom. And that is where the yummy flavor is. But that's not bakavadik, it's not nice. That's not fancy, but that's where it's at. It's like the edges of the brownie that's stuck to the cake, stuck to the side of the pan. That's where the yummy part is. You can't serve it by the dinner. It's not the fancy stuff. So the king, it says, still a hate, likes to come in sometimes, like he takes some of the crunchy chicken from the plate, but he doesn't know. That's why we say Shema Yisrael, Yechud Ilah, talking about the world is nothing except God. That's nothing just except God. Shema Yisrael, Baruch Shem, part that there is a world and that exists. Why? Because that's already lower, but that's where the action. That's much better, but it's not as high. And this is the story of the second temple. It's lower, and then we'll see, of course, when we get to today. So let's see this inside. Page 148, third line. It didn't have the aron. or the luchais, even though the temple didn't miss it. The Rebbe explains in the Sikha that when Shlomo HaMelech and King Solomon built the temple, he actually built a place where he knew it would be destroyed, and he actually built a second location under the Bais Hamikdosh in winding pathways and complicated maze of tunnels where the Aron would be put. And Yeshua HaMelech, many years before the destruction, I think 60 or 50, 70, I'm not sure, many years before the destruction, he actually had a ceremony where they moved it. And the Rebbe explains that there was actually two locations where you can plug in. It reminds me of certain devices. I don't know if they still make them. But certain devices used to be that you could plug it in a car, or use the other thing and plug it into a house, AC or DC. It has two plugs that it comes with. And they both work. The Bais Hamikdosh, there was two locations where you could plug in the Holy of Holies, the luchais, either in the Holy of Holies upstairs or downstairs, location number 2, and they both worked. So even though, and that's why the Rebbe says a fascinating idea, that even though the temple was destroyed by the Romans, they never really destroyed it. Because what makes the Bais Hamikdosh? The Holy of Holies. They don't even know they never destroyed the Bais Hamikdosh. They destroyed the bricks and the mortar. And it gives a metaphor about a yid. When a person dies, what dies is just the bricks and the mortar, the flesh and blood. But the person who he really is never dies. This is a thing to think about. But in any case, so it really was there in location number 2, but in the upstairs location, in the ground floor, it wasn't there. So the second temple was missing the luchais and the arain, etc., etc. It also, one of the 5 things that was missing, the Shechina, the miracles, the way the fire went up, was a certain miracle of the smoke and certain things that didn't happen in the Second Bais Hamikdosh. It means, doesn't mean the Shechina wasn't there. The level of Shechina, as we said, Shechina's ultimate level is Malchus Datzilus. In the First Bais Hamikdosh, it actually had Malchus Dabria. It was a very high level. It didn't come down in process. It came straight from Malchus Dabria into the Holy of Holies. But in the Second Bais Hamikdosh, the Shechina, Malchus Datzilus, came down much more through process. We mentioned before how in the first temple it skipped process. This time it didn't skip process. It went from Malchus, the Atzilus, to Chachma, the Yetzira, all the way down to Malchus, the Chachma, the Bria, to Malchus, the Bria, and the Chachma, the Yetzira, to Malchus, the Yetzira, and it came all the way to Chachma, the Asiya. That means the Holy of Holies, Chachma, Asiya. Now we mentioned Asiya is made up of 2 parts. The spiritual Asiya. We live in the physical part, right here. And the spiritual aspect is also all 10, all the levels. And it came down to the spiritual level of Chachma Dasiya. Big stuff, high stuff. That's where the angels live. It's not like a little thing. It's not like it's some sort of drabby place. But comparatively, it's not Malchus Dabria. It's instead of being a trillion, it's 100 billion. It's a much lower level of holiness. And from Dabria to Malchus Yitzira, they see the Hechel Kodesh Dasiya. And it came down all the way to the Holy of Holies of Asiya. We mentioned that, if you remember from a few classes ago, the highest point in each of the 4 worlds is called the Holy of Holies, or the brain of that world, or the Shechina of that world. So the Shechina comes down to the Holy of Holies of Asiya, and from there it jumps into the physical Bais Hamikdosh. So it came down pretty far. It only skips a little segment. It doesn't skip 2 or 3 worlds as it did in the First Bais Hamikdosh. Kodesh Kadoshim Dasiya, on that level of Chachma Dasiya, or really to be accurate, Chabad Dasiya, Chachma Bina Das, the Seichel, the wisdom of Asiya, and that resided, that dwelled in the Holy of Holies of the physical Bais Hamikdosh of Mount Moriah in Yerushalayim in Eretz Yisrael. V'sharsa b'yashchina Malchus the Yitzira Melubesh b'Kodesh Dasiya. And what was in there? It was, going back to the Matrushka metaphor, it was inside that was Malchus the Yetzirah, meaning it still carried the same origin, the same essence, the same soul, but it came down to more what we call klippa, more coverings, more concealments, so it wasn't as seen. And that's why, even though it was such a, I don't want to say Yerida, but it was such a long journey downward, still you couldn't go in there unless you were the Kohen Gadol, because even though it was less than the first temple and less than other things, it was still Malchus of Atzilus, as included Malchus Dabria, Malchus Yitzira, in the Holy of Holies of Asiya. Okay. And only who could go into that room? Only the Kohen Gadol, only once a year on Yom Kippur. As we mentioned, he's the Holy of Holies of people, on the Holy of Days and the Holy of Place. Okay, now we're coming to what's really practical to us. So this is where it starts getting, I don't want to say more personal, but more applicable to us living in 2021. After the Bais Hamikdosh was destroyed, Bais Hamikdosh, and when the temple was destroyed, so now we have the Holy of Holies. If you remember in the beginning, we said, what is the vehicle, the vessel that carries the Shechina? It's really Torah. In each world, the Torah of that world is a seichel of that world. So Chabad of Beria, Chabad of Yetzirah, and Chabad of Asiyah manifests itself in the Holy of Holies of the physical Bais Hamikdosh. Well, what is when there's no Bais Hamikdosh? Where is it? So it comes down one more level. It comes down into really the practical seichel of our own head. It comes down into the study of Torah. When somebody studies Torah, and it comes out of this, by the way, the next few lines, something amazing. A lot of times a person could sit, and I'm sitting at home learning a sikha. I'm reading a book of English of the talks of the Rebbe. I'm sitting and learning the parsha of the week. And what is my little learning doing for you? The universe. Today's Hayom Yom had such a powerful Hayom Yom, and there's many sikhas that we learned about this, and many talks we had about it. But just real briefly to remind you, today's Hayom Yom, the Rebbe quotes that the Chassidim explained that the real definition of Hashgacha Pratis, because in general, there was Hashgacha Pratis means divine providence. Everything that happens in the world, every single thing that occurs is directed directly by God. That means if there's, God forbid, a storm, it's not random. Hashem wanted that storm to happen now. The Baal Shem Tov went as far to say that not only is there Hashgacha Pratis in the big events, and not only in the small events, but even in the most minute details. That means, for an example, he said this metaphor. He said this example. If a leaf falls off a tree, and by the way, I was sitting in the house this morning, taking care of Zalman, and dozens and dozens and dozens of leaves fall off the tree. Hashem was like, watching all the leaves. If I was thinking about all the trees, just in Mequon. I wasn't getting into Wisconsin and in the north of Wisconsin. If every single leaf falling off a tree, not only is that particular leaf being guided to fall off the tree in that location at that time, but how many times it turns over till it lands on the ground. There's a reason and a specific purpose of that. And not only that, this is what the Alter Rebbe, the Baal Shem Tov adds on, that particular movement of the leaf is not only integral for itself, but it's integral to the ultimate purpose of the master plan of creation. Now, before computers, a person would say, how is that even possible? Doesn't even make sense. But today, a person could know, you could have 100 pages of computer code, and if one letter or one period becomes a comma, one minor change, you could mess up an entire multi-billion-dollar complex creation of computers. You might say, come on, you got 1 billion letters right and one letter is wrong. So ignore that letter. No, it doesn't just mess up that letter. So before computers, how would someone explain this? How is it possible that one leaf in South Africa fell off the leaf, was supposed to step over 4 times, but somebody walked by and closed the door and it fell over 6 times, and now boom, nothing's working in the world. Everything, and he finishes off the Hayom Yom with the following. If this is true about a little leaf falling, how much more true in the world of human beings? That human beings are, you have daimim, sameach, you have inanimate plant life, animal life, and humans, and especially a Jew. Imagine what your particular thing you're doing. Should I light the candle? Should I eat? I waited for 5 hours and 45 minutes till meat. Should I wait 15 more minutes? Does that matter? It matters not only to you and not only to all the Jewish people, but to the master plan when God created the world. Your actions now will affect if it's successful or not, or complicated, needs another week, another day. Everything is affected by us. And so he says, that's what he says there. So now imagine here, when you're sitting at home and learning Torah, and your Torah study is creating the Holy of Holies in this world, that means you're bringing vitality. What does that mean? What did we say earlier? That the Holy of Holies of each world not only gives life to that world, but creates that world. That means theoretically, if at any given moment, every single person in this world stopped studying Torah, the world would cease to exist. Because Torah doesn't just give life to Jews and to Yidden. It gives life not only to non-Jews, but it gives life to every leaf and plant. And when we study Torah, it's through Torah as the vehicle of Shechina coming to the world. It's like removing the brain from the body. What happens if you remove the brain from the body? I mean, just for 15 minutes, I just want to wash it out in the sink. You take the brain out of the body, what do you mean? Come on, The body's been going on for 50 years. It's fine. I'll take the brain out. That's good. Everything learned its job. The feet are functioning. I don't see them talking. You cannot do that. If you stop the brain of the universe, which is Torah, nothing exists. Everything comes, as we mentioned a few classes ago, through Torah. That's why you can't fail by going through Torah, and you can't do better by avoiding Torah, because your path is Torah. That's it. The metaphor we gave back then, if you remember, is like a computer screen. That if a person says after having his computer for a while, you know what I realized? I don't need all that back house computer code. I got on the screen, the picture, the working, the mouse, the click. Get rid of all the computer code. The computer code is the only reason you see something on the screen. Torah is the only reason you see tables and chairs here, because that's the pathway Hashem gives life to the world. So in other words, when you're learning Torah, you are the one, combined with everyone else, that's giving life and vitality and existence and nourishment to the world. And therefore, the reason why you could be successful at work, and you could have healthy children, and the guy next door could have a pet that walks and barks, is only because of you. So it's your fault the neighbor's door barks at night and keeps you up. Okay, whatever. Bottom line is, what comes out of the, I guess. So the bottom line is that this is the power that's in our generation, post Bais Hamikdosh. Hashem moved the Holy of Holies from a physical structure in Israel, in Jerusalem, on the Temple Mount, and he moved it to a conceptual place, the place of Torah study. And that is the vehicle that carries the Shechina, that is the brain, that is the nucleus of life in this world, is the study of Torah. It's not something nice to do. It's not something which is a very good for Jew to study Torah. It is the only way the world can continue to function healthy. They once made a video for kids that this guy's idea to destroy the world was to close down all the yeshivas. And they started seeing earthquakes and things falling apart. The guy tried to create this concept in a video. But the idea is that it's only the study of Torah that keeps the world existing. So you want to help someone out. You want to have a good Israeli army. Make sure guys are studying Torah too. You want to have a successful day. Make sure you spend 15 minutes in the morning studying Torah. And that gives vitality to the whole day. And so back inside here. Hashem only has in this world the place of Torah study. One person sitting at home in Thiensville, Wisconsin, and he's studying Torah. Shechina imay. The Shechina is with him, because like it says in the first chapter of Gemara Brachos. What does it mean, Shechina imay? The process that we said of the Malchus, the Bria, the Malchus, the Yetzirah, that process is happening through you. You become the Holy of Holies. You become the Kedusha Kedoshim. You become Kitayag Mitzvah Torah, Ruben Kekulan Mitzvah Ma'asiyos. And the key here is action. And that's what we're going to go into next. We said, if you remember, the benefit of the Second Temple was that at the end of the day, it wasn't too spiritual. It was physical. Torah has to enter. It's not enough to study Torah like the angels wanted it back then. It's Torah in heaven. Torah has to be with cows and goats and tables and chairs and cheese and steak. It has to be down to earth. It has to be action. One of the interesting things you always found is when we study Torah, we'll say this in 30 seconds, the Torah study has to be in the way that we move our lips. And it's one of the interesting things, I think we spoke about it once, that, when's the last time you saw someone reading a newspaper and moving their lips? Yeah, who doesn't have headline? Who moves lips when they read? Maybe a 7-year-old, a first grader, second grader. No one moves their lips. Here, we're sitting in shul, and I always feel odd in the airports. Until I sit on the train or airport reading, or davening, or saying Chumash or Rambam, bloody Rambam, my lips are moving. I'm thinking, does that guy think like I'm a first grader? Does he think I can't read? So this world of the masks, I'm so much happier. No one can see that I'm moving my lips when I'm reading. Because I don't mind if I can explain it to the guy the purpose, but looking at me, here I am a rabbi, and you don't see anybody move their lips. But that's how we study Torah. Why? Because there has to be a physical action in a mitzvah. If there's no physical action, the mitzvah is not affecting the world. It's not transforming the world. We're going to have it coming up in a few portions. One of the probably more famous Maimarim of the Rebbe is on the words where Yaakov lies down on the floor, actually at Mount Moriah, the Temple Mount, and he lays down and he takes rocks and puts them around his head. He takes those rocks and builds an altar. And the Rebbe explains that episode based on the Alter Rebbe and the Mittler Rebbe's Maimarim, that particular event is the whole experience of the Neshama's purpose in this world. What is that? Yaakov leaves the holy place, the place where like a soul leaves its place, goes out from the high. And Be'er Sheva is the well of the 7, which means either Avraham or Yitzchak, the highest levels. And he comes down to Haran, a place of Haran Af, where people get angry, meaning God can get disappointed. And what does he do? What's his mission? To take Avnei, the stones, and make all the physical into one. the fragmented world to one, and take those stones and build a physical home for God. It should be basically make this house. This stone should be a house for God. The job we have is to take a physical world, take your treadmill and the coffee and the Danish and a nice car and a boat and a Tesla, whatever you have, and use those things, have them, acquire them. You're not helping anybody if you don't acquire them. Take the stones, gather them. The more cars, the more boats, the more homes, the more possessions, the more fur coats. Well, if you're not against fur, the more possessions, the better. And take those things and raise them up to serve Hashem. And that can only be done in the physical world. Our job is to gather as much sparks, and that's only by engaging in the physical world as much as we need to serve Hashem, or as much as we can be creative to serve Hashem. You know what? Let's get a fancier dining room table, a bigger chandelier for Shabbos, another suit, another dress for Shabbos. These are things that actually create dir b'tachtonim. You remember we spoke a while back. Somebody once asked the Rebbe in Yechidus, how could I understand how Jews living, let's say, in Baltimore, New York, or Chicago, elevate the physical world? But who's elevating North Korea and Singapore and all those cities where there's no Jews living? The Rebbe said, open up your suits. He opens up a suit. I think it says made in Singapore, whatever. He says, when you wear on Shabbos this suit, the Rebbe didn't say the little kids, but I like to say that for a joke. All those little kids in the factory sitting in Singapore, Korea, where they made the suit and the breakfast they had that morning and the concrete of the factory and the sidewalk and the car they drove to the factory is all elevated when you walk into the show with the final product on Shabbos and they wear a suit. Because that's the point. When the halacha comes and you sit and you have a fleshig meal or a milchik meal and you bench and make a bracha, that is Torah engaging and finally lifting up the world. And the more deeper we get into the world within permitted ways, the more we can engage and lift up. Torah has to come down to the stones, to the rocks, to the goats, to the sheep, and then we can elevate everything. That's why it has to be physical action. Most of the 630 commandments are physical actions. Obviously, he's saying you have some mitzvahs to love God and fear God where you don't really see the physical actions. He says, but there were even those that are words that you say, and words and things that you think about. Where are words that you say? Talmud Torah has to be specifically words. Berachas Hamazon has to be words that you say. You can't just read it with your eyes. You got to move your lips. The Krishma Utfila, and same thing, saying the Shema and saying the Amidah, you do not fulfill the mitzvah by reading with your eyes. You are not doing the mitzvah. You're missing out. We established in the halacha, thinking is not the same as speaking. As a matter of fact, there are places where you're forbidden to say words of Torah because in the street is dogs or whatever animals that are or other things that are in the street. You're allowed to think Torah. And you're not fulfilling a mitzvah by just feelings. Remember, we spoke back all the way in the beginning of the Tanya that there are two different realities. There's action and there's feelings. Feelings is said with the wings. Ava and Yira wings. But the bird, the actual meat, the potatoes, the primary, the anchor of the mitzvah is the physical action. The feelings just as helps to go higher. Fulfill the mitzvah until you say things with your lips. You have to actually move your lips, and we rabbis established moving your lips is called an action. You might say, I understand how lighting a Shabbos candle is an action, making what a salty the meat, whatever is an action. Where's the action in davening? Moving your lips is a physical action that takes place. The 630 commandments, with the seven rabbinic laws, the gematria Kester equals 620, as we said at the beginning of this chapter. That's Hashem's will. Which is one with his chachma, and it's one with Hashem in his essence. We spoke about, if you remember last week, that some mitzvahs that we have a reason to it, but that's seeing the core. The beauty of a chayk of mitzvah with no reason, or doing it because Hashem said, is that you're connecting with the source, because truth and its source. We gave the example. We made up reasons why someone has two eyes. But the truth is that came later. The real reason you have two eyes because God decided that's how it is in the spiritual realm. That's how you have it in the body. The fact that it helps you with vision depth, that's a nice thing. That's a beautiful thing. But the reason is much deeper. So even though that all these things are manifest itself in the physical way, but all these are connected to the source. How they are in Hashem's desire, Hashem's ratzon, and Hashem's chachma. Like we said, Hashem with wisdom for the foundation of the world. What is that? The nafka mechachma. That's talking about, we said before, the oral Torah comes from chachma ilah, the higher Torah. That's the chachma of Atzilus. Kemoshe Kosav b'Zohar the Abba Yisayid Barta. I'm going to go and explain this next week. We're going to go these last two lines and the rest of the chapter, God willing, we'll finish it next week. And then we will do a closing ceremony on the Tanya. And we'll start the next section. So this is we're up to the Tanya. Bottom line is that in each progressive time in life, in history, for the first Bais Hamikdosh and the second Bais Hamikdosh, and then in our times, as the Torah or as the Shechina descended lower and lower into the process in creation, more and more did the ability to affect the world take place. Just to add on one side point, not side point, it's an important point, but I didn't mention this. Even though everything in this world comes from the same Chachma Dasiya, so Malchus Dasiya, we said Torah comes today, Malchus Dasiya, came all the way down to Malchus. But everything in this world comes from Malchus. The horses, the cows, everything. Difference is, everything in the world, you don't see by looking at it godliness. It's called Eilam. It's Klippa, it's concealment. You see a coffee cup. You see a pad. You see a chair, a table. You don't see the words of God that give it light. Of course, the cup is here, but we see it only as how it appears to us as a physical being. We don't see that this is something right now being created by God. We don't see the holiness or the purpose of the spirituality of it. A Torah is revealed. In Torah, you can see spirituality. So the difference between the rest of the world and Torah, even though they both came through Malchus Dasiya, Torah remains a Malchus Dasiya revealed as holiness. The rest of the world goes through different layers of klippa, concealment that you don't see. Certain things you can see a little more in a child's smile. You can see certain holiness. Sometimes you can see the beauty of Hashem in a 1-year-old or a 6-month-old little smile. You can see it in certain things in creation. You can see a Friday night, or you can feel it. But in general, the world is covered with concealment, and we can't feel or see godliness, even though it comes from the same place as the final journey of Torah coming down to this world. But Torah doesn't have concealment.